Have you ever pictured a middle-aged pregnant homemaker, devoted for decades, uncovering her billionaire husband's affair with a stunning young mistress in a jealous frenzy? That mistress shoves her into raging flames literally, but a hidden camera flips the script, exposing twisted secrets far darker than imagined. This isn't mere betrayal, it's a saga of midlife awakening, resilience like in Eat, Pray, Love or The Good Wife, with tears, rage, and jaw-dropping twists from despairing slow-motion sobs by rainy windows to hope-crushing revelations. Will this betrayed wife rise, empowered from the ashes, or face ultimate ruin, reflect on trust, infidelity, and women's strength over 45 amid financial woes, therapy breakthroughs, and resilience lessons for mature Americans? If you're gripped and curious like me, hit like to cheer on more tales. Comment who's the real villain, the cheating hubby, vengeful mistress, or a surprise twist. Share with loved ones for the ride dramas thrive in discussion. Subscribe and bell on for this 10-chapter binge fest, loaded with cliffhangers, hooks every few minutes, and SEO gems like pregnant wife betrayed, husband affair with mistress, and midlife crisis story to hook you hours. Thanks for joining your vibes, build our story squad. Let's plunge into the drama now. Emily Thompson pressed her hand against her rounded belly as she lay on the examination table, the cold ultrasound gel making her shiver despite the warm June afternoon outside. At 48, this pregnancy felt like a miracle after years of fertility struggles that had left her questioning everything about her worth as a woman. The heartbreaking family drama that would soon unfold was the last thing on her mind as she watched the monitor, waiting to see her baby for the first time. "There's your little one," Dr. Martinez said with a warm smile, pointing to the flickering image on the screen. "Strong heartbeat, right on schedule for 16 weeks. Tears of joy filled Emily's eyes. After 25 years of marriage to Richard, after all the treatments and disappointments, here was their miracle. She reached for her phone to capture a photo of the ultrasound screen, wanting to share this moment with her husband immediately. But as she lifted the device, a notification popped up that would shatter her world completely. A text message intended for Richard, sent to the wrong contact. The preview read, "Can't wait for our secret getaway this weekend. My love, Victoria." Emily's hand trembled as she stared at the screen. Victoria. She knew that name. Richard's new marketing consultant, the stunning 30-something brunette who had joined Thompson Technologies 6 months ago. The woman Richard had mentioned casually at dinner, always with professional detachment, or so Emily had believed. "Mrs. Thompson, are you all right?" Dr. Martinez's voice seemed to come from underwater. Emily's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. Richard's late nights at the office, his sudden interest in weekend business trips, the way he'd become protective of his phone, never leaving it unattended. How could she have been so naive? This pregnant wife betrayed scenario was playing out in the most cruel possible setting, surrounded by the joy of new life while discovering the death of her marriage. "I'm fine," she whispered, though nothing could be further from the truth. Her hands shook as she saved the ultrasound image, her mind already spiraling into the dark reality of a husband affair with mistress that would destroy everything she held dear. The drive home through suburban Chicago felt like navigating through a nightmare. Every stoplight gave her more time to think, to imagine the worst. Emily had always feared this moment, especially after turning 45. In the mirror, she saw the lines around her eyes, the gray threads in her auburn hair, the way her body had softened with age. Meanwhile, Richard remained distinguished and successful, his salt and pepper hair only making him more attractive to younger women seeking security and status. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one clearly meant for her. "Running late tonight. Darling. Board meeting. Don't wait up." The lie tasted bitter even though she hadn't spoken it. Emily pulled into their circular driveway, staring up at the imposing Tudor-style mansion that had been her prison disguised as paradise. The financial hardship after betrayal that she might soon face terrified her almost as much as the emotional devastation. She had no career, no independent income, Nothing but 25 years of being the perfect billionaire's wife. Inside, the house felt different, as if the walls themselves knew her secret. Emily walked through rooms filled with expensive furniture and priceless art, realizing that none of it truly belonged to her. In this midlife betrayal story that was becoming her reality, she was just another possession that could be discarded when Richard grew tired of her. She found herself in the nursery they had started preparing together just weeks ago. Pale yellow walls, carefully chosen furniture, tiny clothes hung with such hope and love. Emily sank into the rocking chair, clutching a small onesie that read, "Daddy's Little Miracle," and let the tears fall freely for the first time. Her phone rang, startling her from her grief. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, her best friend and therapist whose wisdom had guided Emily through countless challenges over the years. "Em, how did the appointment go? Is everything okay with the baby?" "The baby's fine," Emily managed, her voice hollow. "But I think my marriage is over." She told Sarah everything, from the mistaken text to her growing suspicions about Richard's behavior. Sarah listened without judgment, her professional training helping her ask the right questions, while her friendship provided the emotional support Emily desperately needed. "You know what this reminds me of?" Sarah said gently. "That show, The Good Wife. Sometimes the strongest women are the ones who have to rebuild their lives after betrayal. You're stronger than you think. Emily, we'll figure this out together." But as Emily hung up the phone, she felt anything but strong. She felt like a character in a heartbreaking family drama, helpless to change the plot that was destroying her life. The sound of Richard's car in the driveway sent panic through her chest. How could she face him? Knowing what she knew, Richard swept into the house with his usual commanding presence, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his smile bright and seemingly genuine. "Darling, how did the appointment go? I'm sorry I couldn't make it." "Where were you really today?" "Richard." The words escaped before Emily could stop them. His expression flickered for just a moment, so briefly she might have imagined it. "At the office, of course. The Hendricks merger is keeping us all busy." "Why do you ask?" Emily studied his face, searching for tells she had never needed to look for before. "I got a text meant for you today. From Victoria." The color drained from Richard's face, but he recovered quickly. "Victoria texts the whole team about project updates. You know how demanding clients can be. Secret weekend getaway." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Richard moved closer, taking her hands in his voice gentle and concerned. "Emily, sweetheart, you're pregnant and emotional. You're reading things into innocent communications. Victoria's handling the Peterson account presentation. And yes, we have a business retreat this weekend. Nothing more." The way he explained it sounded so reasonable, so logical. Emily wanted desperately to believe him, to return to the safety of ignorance. But something deep in her gut, some feminine intuition honed by decades of marriage, knew he was lying. "Let me see your phone," she said suddenly. Richard's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Emily, this is ridiculous. I won't be treated like a criminal in my own home. You're being paranoid." The word paranoid hit her like a slap. It was a technique she recognized from movies and books, the way unfaithful spouses made their victims question their own sanity. In this midlife crisis moment, she was being gaslit by the man she had devoted her life to supporting. "I'm going to take a shower," Richard said, kissing her forehead with practiced affection. "Try to get some rest. You look tired." As soon as she heard the bathroom door close and the shower start running, Emily crept into Richard's study. His laptop sat open on his desk, password protected, but she knew his habits. He used the same password for everything Thompson, 225, their intended retirement year. Her hands shook as she navigated to his email. What she found there confirmed her worst fears and revealed layers of betrayal she hadn't even imagined. Months of correspondence with Victoria, growing progressively more intimate, hotel reservations, jewelry purchases that Emily had never received, photos of Victoria wearing a necklace Emily recognized as being from Richard's business dinner 3 weeks ago. But it was the older emails that truly devastated her. Evidence of at least two previous affairs during their marriage, one coinciding exactly with their fertility struggles 5 years ago. While Emily had been enduring painful treatments and monthly disappointments, Richard had been consoling himself with his secretary. The sound of the shower stopping sent Emily scrambling to close the laptop and return to the living room. She sat on the sofa, staring at the fireplace, when Richard appeared in his bathrobe, hair still damp. "Feeling better?" he asked, settling beside her with false concern. "Much," Emily lied, her voice surprisingly steady. "You're right, I was being silly." Richard smiled and pulled her close, and Emily had to fight not to recoil from his touch. How many times had he held her like this after being with another woman? How many lies had he whispered in her ear while planning his next betrayal? They were interrupted by the doorbell. Richard frowned, glancing at his watch. Who could that be at this hour? Emily's heart stopped when she saw Victoria through the peephole. The woman was stunning in the way that only youth and expensive maintenance could achieve. Perfectly styled dark hair, a dress that cost more than most people's rent, jewelry that sparkled even in the porch light. "I'll get it," Emily said, surprising herself with her calm tone. Victoria's smile faltered when Emily opened the door instead of Richard. "Oh, Mrs. Thompson, I was hoping to speak with Richard about tomorrow's presentation." "At 9 p.m., Emily asked sweetly. "How dedicated of you." "Emily, who is it?" Richard appeared behind her, and Emily caught the flash of panic in his eyes when he saw Victoria. "Ms. Hale was just telling me about tomorrow's presentation," Emily said, watching both of their faces carefully. "She seems very invested in the project." Victoria recovered first, her smile returning with calculated warmth. "I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to make sure we were prepared. The Peterson account is so important to the company." "Of course," Emily said. "Richard speaks about you often. He says you bring such energy to the workplace." The subtext was clear to all three of them, but Victoria's smile never wavered. "I do try to be thorough in everything I do." As Emily watched the exchange between her husband and his mistress, she realized this was more than just an affair. This was a calculated attack on her life, her security, her very identity. Victoria wasn't just stealing her husband, she was positioning herself to take everything Emily had built over 25 years of marriage. "Well, I should let you both get back to your evening," Victoria said, her eyes lingering on Richard with unmistakable intimacy. "See you bright and early tomorrow, Richard." After the door closed, Emily turned to her husband with newfound clarity. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become something more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. "She's beautiful," Emily said conversationally. "I suppose," Richard replied, his discomfort obvious. "I don't really notice such things." "Of course you don't," Emily agreed. "Just like you don't notice the way she looks at you, or the way you look at her." "Emily, please, not tonight. You're pregnant and stressed, and you're imagining things that aren't there." But Emily was done being gaslit. She was done being made to feel crazy for trusting her instincts. In this moment, looking at her husband's guilty face, she made a decision that would change everything. "You're right," she said finally. "I am stressed. I think I'll call Sarah in the morning and ask her to recommend a good lawyer. You know, just to make sure our wills are updated before the baby comes." Richard's face went pale. "A lawyer? Why would you need a lawyer?" Emily smiled, the expression feeling foreign on her face after the evening's revelations. "For estate planning, of course. What did you think I meant?" As she walked upstairs to their bedroom, Emily heard Richard frantically dialing his phone. She couldn't make out the words, but the urgent, hushed tone told her everything she needed to know. The husband affair with Mistress was about to escalate into something much more dangerous. Standing at their bedroom window, watching Richard pace in the garden below while speaking animatedly into his phone, Emily placed a protective hand over her belly. Whatever was coming, she would be ready. The naive housewife was gone. replaced by a woman who would fight for her child's future and her own survival. But as she watched, she noticed something that chilled her blood. Hidden among the landscaping, barely visible in the darkness, was the blinking red light of a camera. Richard's security system was more extensive than she had realized, and she wondered with growing dread, who else might be watching this heartbreaking family drama unfold? The game, Emily realized, was just beginning. Emily spent the sleepless night researching everything she could about divorce laws in Illinois, her laptop screen casting an eerie glow in the darkened bedroom. Richard lay beside her, seemingly peaceful in sleep, but she noticed how he clutched his phone even in unconsciousness. The pregnant wife betrayed was learning to be strategic, to think beyond the immediate pain of discovery. By morning, she had a plan. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Emily announced over breakfast, her voice carefully modulated to sound apologetic. "You're right. I was being paranoid and emotional." Richard looked up from his newspaper, relief flooding his features. "I'm glad you're feeling more rational this morning. Pregnancy hormones can really affect judgment." The condescension in his voice made Emily's jaw clench, but she maintained her facade. "I thought maybe I should talk to someone. Sarah recommended a therapist who specializes in pregnancy anxiety. Dr. Rebecca Chen." "That sounds like an excellent idea," Richard said, already distracted by his phone buzzing with messages. "Whatever you need to feel better." What Richard didn't know was that Dr. Chen was actually Sarah's colleague who specialized in helping women navigate complex family situations, including those involving infidelity and financial abuse. Emily was building her support network strategically, learning from women like those portrayed in shows like The Good Wife, who had faced similar betrayals and emerged stronger. The drive to Dr. Chen's office took Emily through downtown Chicago, past the gleaming tower that housed Thomson Technologies. She wondered if Victoria was up there right now, in Richard's office, planning their next rendezvous. The thought made her stomach churn, but she forced herself to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the pain. Dr. Chen's office was warm and inviting, filled with soft lighting and comfortable furniture that immediately put Emily at ease. The therapist herself was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and an air of competence that reminded Emily of everything she herself could become with the right guidance. "Sarah told me a bit about your situation," Dr. Chen began gently. "Why don't you tell me what's bringing you here today?" Emily found herself pouring out everything: the discovery of the affair, her fears about her future, the way Richard made her feel crazy for trusting her instincts. Dr. Chen listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that helped Emily organize her thoughts. "What you're experiencing is very common in what we call midlife betrayal situations," Dr. Chen explained. "The combination of a major life change like pregnancy with the discovery of infidelity can feel overwhelming. But you're stronger than you realize. Emily, the fact that you're here, seeking help and support, tells me you're not going to be a victim in this story." "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in someone else's life," Emily admitted. "Like I'm watching a heartbreaking family drama unfold. But I'm just a character with no control over the plot." Dr. Chen smiled knowingly. "Have you ever read Elizabeth Gilbert's Eat, Pray, Love? It's about a woman who discovers that even in midlife, even after devastating betrayal, we can recreate ourselves. We can choose who we want to become." Emily had read the book years ago, but now she saw it with new eyes. "I remember thinking it was selfish of her to leave everything behind. But now you understand that sometimes leaving everything behind is the only way to save yourself," Dr. Chen finished. "And in your case, you're not just saving yourself. You're saving your child from growing up in a home built on lies." The session continued for an hour, with Dr. Chen helping Emily develop coping strategies and begin planning for various scenarios. By the time Emily left, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. But the feeling was short-lived. As she drove home, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: "Enjoying your therapy session. Some secrets are harder to keep than others. Sonon, a friend." Emily's blood ran cold. Someone was watching her, following her movements. The most likely suspect was Victoria. But how had she gotten Emily's number? And more importantly, what other secrets was she referring to? At home, Emily found Richard in his study, video conferencing with what appeared to be a group of investors. Through the glass door, she could see Victoria sitting beside him, looking every inch the professional consultant. But Emily noticed things she had missed before: the way Victoria's hand lingered on Richard's shoulder when she leaned over to point at something on his laptop, the familiar way she moved around his office, the intimate smile they shared when they thought no one was looking. This husband affair with Mistress wasn't just about sex or midlife crisis behavior. Victoria was positioning herself as Richard's professional partner, as well as his personal one. She was systematically inserting herself into every aspect of his life, making herself indispensable. Emily retreated to the kitchen, her mind racing. She needed more information, but she also needed to be careful. If Victoria was willing to threaten her, there was no telling how far she might go to protect her interests. The house phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Thompson residence. Emily, it's Linda Martinez from next door. Could you come over for coffee? I have something I need to discuss with you. Linda was a divorced woman in her early 50s who had moved in 6 months ago after a messy split from her investment banker husband. Emily had always found her intimidating, with her sharp business suits and no-nonsense attitude, but perhaps that was exactly what she needed right now. Linda's house was the mirror image of Emily's, but felt completely different. Where Emily's home was all soft furnishings and family photos, Linda's was sleek and modern, with the kind of clean lines that spoke of independence and self-reliance. I'm going to cut straight to the chase, Linda said, pouring coffee into expensive-looking mugs. I know what's happening with Richard and that young woman. Emily's heart stopped. What do you mean? I work in commercial real estate now, and I handle some high-end properties downtown. Victoria Hale recently put down a deposit on a penthouse apartment, a very expensive one, the kind that requires significant financial backing. The implications hit Emily like a physical blow. Richard wasn't just having an affair. He was setting Victoria up for the long term. He was probably planning to leave Emily once the baby was born, to start fresh with his young mistress in a new home that Emily's years of support and sacrifice had helped pay for. There's more, Linda continued, her expression grim. I've been through this kind of betrayal myself, and I learned the hard way that women like us need to be smart about protecting ourselves. Has Richard ever mentioned offshore accounts, international investments? Emily shook her head, feeling naive and helpless. He handles all the finances. I trusted him completely. That was your first mistake, Linda said, not unkindly. Men like Richard, they don't just cheat emotionally or physically. They cheat financially too. They move assets, create shell companies, do whatever it takes to ensure that when the divorce comes, we're left with as little as possible. The words financial hardship after betrayal took on new meaning as Linda explained how her own ex-husband had systematically hidden millions while maintaining the facade of a loving marriage. Emily realized she could be facing not just emotional devastation, but complete financial ruin. What do I do? Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. You fight back, Linda said firmly. You document everything. You get your own lawyer, not the family lawyer Richard probably wants you to use. You start building your own financial independence. And most importantly, you stop being the victim in this story and start being the hero. Emily spent the rest of the afternoon with Linda, learning about hidden assets, forensic accounting, and the kind of strategic thinking that had allowed Linda to emerge from her divorce with her dignity and financial security intact. It was like being given a masterclass in female empowerment, taught by someone who had survived the exact same betrayal Emily was facing. But as Emily walked back to her own house, she felt watched again. Looking up at her bedroom window, she saw a figure move away from the glass. Richard was home early, and he had been watching her meeting with Linda. Inside, Richard was waiting for her in the hallway, his expression carefully neutral. How was your day? Darling, I saw you having coffee with the neighbor. Linda's very interesting, Emily said carefully. We were discussing her work in real estate. Oh, are you thinking of moving? Richard's voice was light, but Emily caught the underlying tension. Not at all. I love our home. I just find her career fascinating. She's so independent, so self-sufficient. I admire women like that. Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, you've never needed to worry about such things. I've always taken care of everything for us. Yes, you have, Emily agreed. I'm very lucky to have such a devoted husband. They stared at each other for a moment, both knowing that beneath the polite words lay a battle of wills that was just beginning. Emily was no longer the naive housewife who could be easily manipulated. She was becoming something Richard hadn't anticipated, a worthy opponent. That evening, as Richard claimed to be working late in his study, Emily put Linda's advice into practice. She carefully photographed documents she found in Richard's desk, forwarded herself copies of financial statements from his computer, and began building the evidence file that would protect her and her child. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The security cameras Richard had installed throughout the house suddenly felt less like protection and more like surveillance. Who was watching those feeds, and what would they do with the information they gathered? Emily's phone buzzed with another anonymous text. Pretty houses can become very dangerous places. Be careful where you step. This time, the threat was unmistakable. Victoria wasn't just stealing Emily's husband. She was actively working to intimidate and isolate her. But what Victoria didn't understand was that threats only worked on victims. And Emily was discovering that she was much stronger than anyone had imagined. As she prepared for bed, Emily made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would stop playing defense and start playing offense. In this midlife betrayal story, she was going to rewrite the ending. But first, she needed to understand exactly what kind of enemies she was facing. And that meant uncovering the truth about Victoria Hale, no matter how dangerous that truth might be. Emily's investigation into Victoria Hale began at dawn, fueled by determination and the kind of focused anger that comes from a woman protecting her unborn child. Using the research skills she had developed during her graduate studies 25 years ago, before marriage had redirected her ambitions, Emily dove into public records, social media, and professional directories. What she discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Victoria Hale had appeared in Chicago 18 months ago with impeccable credentials and no digital footprint before 2023. Her LinkedIn profile claimed experience with major consulting firms, but when Emily called those companies, pretending to be verifying employment, none had records of her. Her references were disconnected numbers or non-existent email addresses. Victoria wasn't just Richard's mistress. She was a professional con artist who had likely targeted him specifically for his wealth and influence. This husband affair with Mistress was actually an elaborate long-term scam, and Emily was the only thing standing between Victoria and complete success. The realization should have sent Emily running to Richard with evidence, but she knew better now. Victoria had spent over a year carefully positioning herself in Richard's life, business, and emotions. Emily's word against Victoria's polished manipulation would only make Emily look more paranoid and unstable. Dr. Chen had warned her about this during their second session. Women like Victoria are experts at making the wife appear to be the problem. They present themselves as the solution to whatever unhappiness they've helped create in the marriage. So what do I do? Emily had asked. You get smart, you get strategic, and you get evidence that even your husband can't deny. Now, sitting in her car outside Thompson Technologies, Emily was putting that advice into practice. She had spent the morning learning Victoria's routines, discovering that the woman left for lunch every day at exactly 12:30 and returned at 2. Today, Emily planned to use that time window to search Victoria's office. The building's security recognized Emily as Richard's wife, allowing her to access the executive floor without question. She had brought homemade cookies for Richard's assistant, claiming she wanted to surprise her husband with a lunch visit. But Richard was in meetings all afternoon, giving Emily the perfect opportunity to explore. Victoria's office was a study in calculated perfection. expensive furniture that complemented but didn't overshadow Richard's larger suite, fresh flowers that Emily recognized as being from the same florist Richard used for their anniversary, family photos that, upon closer inspection, appeared to be stock images arranged to suggest a loving background without providing any real information about Victoria's past. Emily was photographing the contents of Victoria's desk when she heard voices in the hallway. Quickly closing drawers and pocketing her phone, she managed to position herself by the window, admiring the view of downtown Chicago when Victoria appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Thompson, what a surprise, and are you looking for Richard?" Victoria's tone was friendly, but her eyes were calculating. Emily felt like prey being evaluated by a predator, and she forced herself to smile warmly in response. "I wanted to surprise him with lunch, but his assistant said he's tied up in meetings all day. I was just admiring the view from your office. You're so lucky to have this perspective." "Yes, Richard made sure I had the best available space," Victoria said, moving into the office with the confident stride of a woman who knew she was in control. "He's very thoughtful that way." The possessive way Victoria said Richard's name made Emily's skin crawl, but she maintained her composure. "He certainly is. He's always been generous with people he values." "We do work very closely together," Victoria continued, settling behind her desk like a queen holding court. "The Peterson merger requires so much attention to detail. Richard and I often work late into the evening to ensure everything is perfect." Emily caught the subtext immediately. Victoria was describing their affair while maintaining plausible deniability, daring Emily to react. It was a power play designed to establish dominance, to make Emily feel like the intruder in her own husband's life. "How dedicated of you both," Emily replied sweetly. "Richard's lucky to have such a committed partner. In business. I mean," Victoria's smile sharpened, "Richard deserves someone who truly appreciates his talents and ambitions. Someone who can match his energy and vision for the future." The implication was clear. Emily was the anchor holding Richard back, while Victoria was the wind in his sails. It was a narrative Emily recognized from countless movies and books about midlife crisis affairs, where the older wife was portrayed as boring and the younger mistress as exciting and dynamic. "Well, I should let you get back to work," Emily said, moving toward the door. "I'll just pop in to say hello to Richard before I go. Actually, he specifically asked not to be disturbed during his 2 o'clock meeting. Something about the Hendricks account requiring absolute confidentiality." Emily knew there was no Hendricks account. Richard's afternoon calendar, which she had checked that morning on his computer, showed him blocked out for strategic planning with no other participants listed. Victoria was lying to keep Emily away from Richard, and Emily realized this level of control suggested the affair was more advanced than she had feared. "Of course," Emily said. "I'll catch him at home tonight." But as Emily waited for the elevator, she heard Victoria's voice through the office door, speaking in rapid, urgent whispers to someone on the phone. Emily couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably agitated. Victoria was calling someone immediately after Emily's visit, reporting on the encounter. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, but Emily didn't get on. Instead, she walked to the building's coffee shop on the ground floor and ordered a latte, positioning herself where she could see the parking garage exit. If Victoria was rattled enough by Emily's unexpected visit, she might break her routine and leave early. Emily was right. At 1:15, Victoria's silver BMW pulled out of the garage and headed north toward the suburbs. Acting on impulse, Emily followed at a safe distance, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. For the first time since discovering the affair, she felt like she was taking control instead of just reacting. Victoria drove to a small park on the edge of Wilmette, one that Emily recognized as a popular spot for discreet meetings. Emily parked several blocks away and walked through the trees until she could see Victoria sitting on a bench near a small pond. After several minutes, a man approached and sat beside her. Emily's blood ran cold when she recognized him, David Kellerman, Richard's business partner and oldest friend. David had been best man at their wedding, godfather to the child Emily and Richard had never been able to conceive until now. If David was involved in Victoria's scheme, the betrayal ran deeper than Emily had imagined. Using her phone's camera, Emily zoomed in as much as possible while still maintaining cover behind a large oak tree. She couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language spoke volumes. David handed Victoria an envelope, which she quickly tucked into her purse. Then Victoria pulled out her phone and showed David something on the screen that made him look distinctly uncomfortable. Emily was so focused on documenting the meeting that she didn't notice the footsteps behind her until it was too late. Enjoying the show? Emily. Emily spun around to find Victoria standing just 10 feet away, her expression no longer friendly or professional. The mask had dropped completely, revealing the calculating predator underneath. "I don't know what you mean," Emily said, trying to sound casual while her heart hammered against her ribs. "Playing dumb doesn't suit you," Victoria said, stepping closer. "You're obviously more clever than Richard gives you credit for. Following me, searching my office, building your little investigation, it's actually quite impressive." Emily's mouth went dry. Victoria had known about the office search, which meant there were cameras Emily hadn't spotted, or Victoria had other ways of monitoring her space. "The question is," Victoria continued, "what are you planning to do with whatever you think you've discovered?" "I'm planning to protect my family," Emily said, finding her voice. Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Your family, Emily, sweetheart. You don't have a family. You have a husband who's tired of pretending to love you, and a baby who will grow up embarrassed by their pathetic, clinging mother." The words hit Emily like physical blows, but she forced herself to stand straighter. "Richard loves me, and he'll love our child." "Richard loves what I can give him," Victoria said coldly. "Youth, excitement, intellectual stimulation. Someone who enhances his success instead of weighing him down with domestic mediocrity." Emily felt tears threatening, but she refused to give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her break. "If you're so confident about that, why are you here threatening me instead of simply waiting for Richard to leave?" Victoria's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. "Because you're more persistent than we anticipated. You should have simply accepted the inevitable and started planning your exit gracefully. Instead, you're fighting for something that was already lost." We," Emily asked, seizing on the slip. "Who else is involved in this?" Victoria realized her mistake immediately, her face hardening. "You need to stop digging. Emily, for your own safety and that of your baby." "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice," Victoria said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Accidents happen, especially to pregnant women who get too stressed, who push themselves too hard. It would be such a tragedy if something happened to you or your child because you couldn't let go." Emily's protective instincts flared, overriding her fear. "If you think you can intimidate me with threats against my baby, you've seriously misjudged me." Victoria smiled coldly. "Have I? Let's test that theory." Before Emily could react, Victoria grabbed her arm and began pulling her toward the small bonfire that park maintenance had been using to burn autumn leaves. The pregnant wife betrayed suddenly found herself in literal danger, not just emotional turmoil. "What are you doing?" Emily tried to pull free, but Victoria's grip was surprisingly strong. "Teaching you a lesson about playing with fire," Victoria hissed, dragging Emily closer to the flames. "Some women need to learn the hard way that they can't win every battle." Emily could feel the heat from the fire on her face, could smell the acrid smoke that made her cough and her eyes water. In this moment of terror, she realized that Victoria wasn't just a con artist or a homewrecker. She was genuinely dangerous, capable of physical violence to protect her scheme. With a surge of adrenaline fueled by maternal instinct, Emily yanked her arm free and stumbled backward, but not before the flames caught the edge of her sleeve. She beat out the small fire quickly, but not before it singed her arm, leaving an angry red mark on her skin. "You're insane," Emily gasped, cradling her burned arm. "I'm practical," Victoria corrected. And I'm done being patient with you. This is your last warning. Emily, back off, or next time you might not be so lucky. Victoria walked away without looking back, leaving Emily alone by the smoking fire, shaking with shock and pain, as she sat on a nearby bench, trying to process what had just happened. Emily heard the sound of a car starting. Looking up, she saw David Kellerman's Mercedes pulling away from the parking area, confirming that he had witnessed the entire confrontation. The drive home was a blur of emotions. Emily's burned arm throbbed with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of how far Victoria was willing to go to protect her position. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of realizing that Richard's oldest friend was part of the conspiracy against her. At home, Emily sat in her bathroom, treating the burn while staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was no longer the naive housewife who had discovered the affair just days ago. This woman had faced down a dangerous adversary and survived. This woman was discovering reservoirs of strength she hadn't known she possessed. But as Emily bandaged her arm, she noticed something that made her heart stop. There, mounted discreetly in the corner of the bathroom, was a tiny camera she had never seen before. How long had it been there? What other intimate moments had been recorded and watched? Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Looking directly into the camera, Emily smiled and spoke clearly. I won't wait up, darling. I have plans of my own. She was done being watched, threatened, and manipulated. Tomorrow, she would start fighting back with everything she had. In this heartbreaking family drama, the pregnant wife betrayed was about to become the most dangerous player in the game. But first, she needed to figure out exactly how many people were involved in Victoria's scheme and what they ultimately planned to do with the footage from those hidden cameras. Because Emily was beginning to suspect that her husband's secret recording system would ultimately be the key to exposing the truth about everyone involved in this elaborate deception. The game was far from over. In fact, Emily realized with grim determination, it had only just begun. Emily's burn had healed to a faint pink mark by the time she returned to Dr. Chen's office, but the emotional scars from Victoria's attack ran much deeper. During their session, Emily had recounted the entire confrontation, watching Dr. Chen's expression grow increasingly concerned. What Victoria did was assault. Emily, you should consider filing a police report. With what evidence? Emily asked bitterly. It would be my word against hers. And she's already positioned herself as the professional while painting me as the unstable pregnant wife. Besides, I think there's something much bigger happening here than just an affair. Dr. Chen leaned forward. What do you mean? Emily pulled out her phone, showing the photographs she had managed to take of Victoria's meeting with David Kellerman. Richard's business partner is involved. They exchanged money and documents, and David witnessed Victoria attacking me without intervening. This isn't just about my marriage anymore. I think Victoria is planning something that could destroy Richard's business, his reputation, maybe even his freedom. And you want to warn him? Emily hesitated. The answer was complicated. Part of her still loved the man Richard had been, or had pretended to be. Part of her wanted to protect him from the predator who had infiltrated their lives. But another part of her, the part that was growing stronger each day, wondered if Richard deserved whatever Victoria was planning. I want to protect my child's future, Emily said finally. If Richard goes down, if the company fails, if there's a scandal that destroys everything, my baby will pay the price. I need to understand what Victoria's real plan is before I decide how to stop it. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. That's very mature reasoning. But Emily, you need to be careful. If Victoria is willing to physically attack you, and if this conspiracy involves Richard's business partner, you could be in real danger. I know, Emily said, but I'm not helpless anymore. I've been learning things, developing skills I didn't know I had. Linda next door has been teaching me about financial investigations, and I've been documenting everything. Tell me about this documentation. Emily smiled for the first time in days. I've been keeping a detailed journal, photographing documents, recording conversations when possible. I even figured out how to access the footage from Richard's security cameras. He thinks they're just for protection, but they've actually recorded some very interesting interactions between him and Victoria. You've been busy, Dr. Chen observed. How does it feel to be taking control of your situation instead of just reacting to it? Empowering, Emily admitted. Scary, but empowering. I feel like I'm finally becoming the person I was meant to be before I convinced myself that being a supportive wife was enough of an identity. That afternoon, Emily put her newfound investigative skills to the test. While Richard was at a supposedly legitimate business lunch, Emily used her access to his computer to dig deeper into Thomson Technologies' financial records. What she found confirmed her suspicions and revealed layers of deception that shocked even her. Over the past 6 months, shortly after Victoria's arrival, significant amounts of money had been transferred to offshore accounts. Projects had been created that existed only on paper. Invoices had been submitted for services that were never rendered. Victoria wasn't just having an affair with Richard, she was systematically looting his company. But the most damning discovery was a series of encrypted files that Emily managed to access using Richard's password patterns. The files contained detailed plans for what appeared to be a complex embezzlement scheme, with Victoria and David as co-conspirators and Richard as the unwitting fall guy. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Victoria would continue the affair, becoming more entrenched in both Richard's personal and professional life. Meanwhile, she and David would siphon money from the company through various shell corporations and fake contracts. When the theft was eventually discovered, all evidence would point to Richard as the mastermind, with Victoria appearing to be another victim of his deception. Emily's hands shook as she printed copies of the most incriminating documents. Richard wasn't just cheating on her, he was being set up for financial ruin and possibly criminal charges. The man she had loved for 25 years was about to lose everything because he had trusted the wrong people. Her phone rang, startling her from her research. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I need you to listen very carefully, Sarah said, her voice tense with urgency. I've been doing some research on Victoria Hale, calling in favors with colleagues who work in corporate security. Victoria Hale isn't her real name. Emily's heart stopped. What do you mean her real name is Victoria Caldwell, and she has a history of targeting wealthy older men? There have been at least 3 other cases in different cities over the past 5 years. She works with a partner, always a trusted friend or business associate of the target, and their method is always the same: seduce the man, infiltrate his business, embezzle funds, then disappear before anyone realizes what happened. David, Emily whispered. David Kellerman is her partner. That makes sense. Emily, you need to be very careful. In the previous cases, 2 of the wives died in what appeared to be accidents. One fell downstairs, another drowned in her bathtub. Both deaths occurred just before the financial fraud was about to be exposed. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. They're planning to kill me. I think it's possible, Sarah said grimly. Emily, you need to go to the police with what you've discovered. Tonight. But even as Emily agreed, she knew it wasn't that simple. Victoria and David had been planning this for months, maybe years. They would have alibis, explanations, and ways to discredit anything Emily brought to the authorities. Without irrefutable proof of their conspiracy, Emily would just look like a jealous wife trying to destroy her husband's business relationships. After hanging up with Sarah, Emily sat in Richard's study, surrounded by evidence of the conspiracy that was destroying her life. She felt trapped between protecting a husband who had betrayed her and potentially letting criminals destroy him and escape with millions of dollars that should belong to her child. The sound of Richard's car in the driveway forced Emily to quickly hide the documents and clear the computer's browser history. She was in the kitchen, pretending to prepare dinner, when Richard entered with an expression she had never seen before, guilty uncertainty mixed with what appeared to be genuine distress. Emily, we need to talk, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. For a moment, Emily's heart leaped with hope. Had Richard discovered Victoria's true nature? Was he ready to confess everything and ask for forgiveness? Of course, she said, turning to face him fully. What's wrong? Richard sat heavily at the kitchen table, running his hands through his hair in a gesture she recognized from their early marriage when he was stressed about business problems. There are some irregularities in the company's finances, he began slowly. Money that seems to be missing from several accounts. My accountant discovered the discrepancies yesterday. Emily felt a chill of recognition. Victoria's plan was accelerating. What kind of irregularities? Large transfers that I don't remember authorizing. Invoices for services that don't match any projects I'm aware of. It looks like someone has been embezzling from the company, possibly for months. Emily sat across from him, watching his face carefully. Do you have any idea who might be responsible? Richard's expression was tortured. The transfers all have my electronic signature. The authorization codes are ones that only I'm supposed to know. If I didn't know better, I'd think I was losing my mind. This was it, Emily realized. This was the moment when Victoria's plan shifted into its final phase. Soon, evidence would emerge that painted Richard as the embezzler. Victoria would express shock and betrayal at being deceived by a man she trusted. David would reluctantly confirm that Richard had been acting suspiciously, and Emily would be left with a husband facing criminal charges and a company in ruins. Unless she acted first. Richard, Emily said carefully, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen with an open mind. She told him everything, her discovery of the affair, her investigation into Victoria's background, the evidence of embezzlement, even Victoria's attack at the park. Richard's face cycled through disbelief, anger, hurt, and finally a kind of resigned devastation. You're saying Victoria has been using me, he said when Emily finished, that everything between us was just part of an elaborate con. I'm saying that Victoria Caldwell, which is her real name, has done this before to other men, and their wives ended up dead before the truth came out. Richard looked up sharply. Dead? Emily nodded gravely. Sarah found records of 2 previous cases where wives died in suspicious accidents just before financial crimes were exposed. I think they're planning to kill me. Richard, I think that's why Victoria pushed me toward that fire. She was testing how far she could go. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Emily watched emotions play across his face, the realization that he had been manipulated, that his affair had endangered his family, that his oldest friend had betrayed him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. What have I done? Emily reached across the table and took his hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt despite everything that had happened between them. You trusted people who turned out to be monsters, but we still have time to stop them. How? Emily smiled, feeling stronger than she had in weeks. We're going to beat them at their own game, but first, I need to know, are you willing to do whatever it takes to protect our family and expose the truth? Richard looked into her eyes, and for the first time in months, Emily saw the man she had fallen in love with 25 years ago. Yes, he said firmly, whatever it takes. Emily squeezed his hand. Then tomorrow, we start fighting back, and this time, we're going to make sure Victoria and David regret ever targeting our family. But as they sat together, planning their counterattack, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere in the house, cameras were recording their every word and movement. Victoria would know by morning that her plan had been exposed. The race to gather evidence and expose the truth had begun. And Emily suspected that Victoria Caldwell was about to become much more dangerous now that she realized her carefully laid plans were unraveling. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become the hunter instead of the hunted. But in this deadly game of deception and revenge, Emily wondered if anyone would survive with their lives and hearts intact. Emily woke at 3 in the morning to sharp pains radiating across her abdomen. Beside her, Richard was already awake, his face creased with worry as he watched her try to breathe through what felt like intense cramping. How long have you been having contractions? He asked, his hand gently supporting her back as she struggled to sit up. They're not contractions, Emily insisted, though fear was creeping into her voice. It's too early. The baby isn't due for another 4 months. But even as she spoke, Emily knew something was seriously wrong. The pain was unlike anything she had experienced during her pregnancy, sharp and insistent in a way that made her stomach clench with terror. At 20 weeks, their baby was nowhere near ready to survive outside the womb. Richard was already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling Dr. Martinez." The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. Emily found herself on a gurney, monitors attached to her belly, while medical professionals spoke in the kind of hushed, serious tones that indicated genuine concern. Richard held her hand as Dr. Martinez explained what the tests were revealing. "You're experiencing what we call preterm labor symptoms," the doctor said gently. "Your cervix is beginning to dilate, and we're detecting some irregularities in the baby's heart rate. We need to stop this process immediately." "What could have caused this?" Richard asked, his voice tight with controlled panic. Dr. Martinez glanced between them carefully. "Extreme stress can certainly trigger preterm labor. Have you been under any unusual pressure lately?" Emily. Emily thought about Victoria's attack, the discovery of the embezzlement scheme, the constant fear and anxiety that had consumed her life for the past week. You could say that. The next 12 hours were a nightmare of medical interventions. Steroid injections to help the baby's lungs develop in case early delivery became unavoidable, and constant monitoring that showed their child was fighting for survival. Emily lay in the hospital bed, consumed with guilt and terror that her investigation into Victoria's crimes had somehow endangered her baby's life. "This isn't your fault," Richard said, reading her thoughts. "If anyone's to blame, it's me for bringing Victoria into our lives in the first place." But Emily's guilt was compounded by what happened next. While she was sedated and receiving treatment to stop the preterm labor, Richard's phone rang with news that would transform their crisis into a complete catastrophe. "Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Sarah Walsh with the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. We need you to come down to the station immediately. There are some serious irregularities in your company's financial records that require your immediate attention." Richard's blood ran cold. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that suggest large-scale embezzlement. Sir, we've received evidence that indicates significant theft from Thompson Technologies. And unfortunately, all the digital trails lead back to your personal authorization codes." Even through her medication-induced haze, Emily understood what was happening. While she was fighting for their baby's life, Victoria was activating the final phase of her plan. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Victoria had somehow known about Emily's medical emergency and used it as the perfect opportunity to spring her trap. "I can't leave right now," Richard told the detective. "My wife is in the hospital with pregnancy complications." "I understand this is difficult timing, Mr. Thompson, but financial crimes of this magnitude require immediate investigation. If you don't come voluntarily, we'll have to issue a warrant." Richard looked at Emily with anguished eyes. She could see him torn between staying with her and their endangered child, or protecting himself and their financial future from Victoria's scheme. "Go," Emily whispered, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Sarah is coming to stay with me. You need to deal with this before it gets worse. I don't want to leave you alone." "I'm not alone," Emily said, gesturing to the monitors surrounding her bed. "I have the best medical care possible, but if you don't deal with the financial situation now, we might not have the insurance or resources to pay for any of this." Richard kissed her forehead gently. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Fight for our baby. Emily, don't let them win." But as Richard left for what would become the most humiliating day of his professional life, Emily received a visit that proved Victoria's cruelty knew no bounds. The woman appeared in the hospital room doorway like a twisted angel of mercy, carrying flowers and wearing an expression of perfectly calculated concern. "Emily, I heard about your emergency. I wanted to make sure you were okay." Emily stared at her husband's mistress, the woman who had pushed her toward fire, who had threatened her child's safety, who was at that very moment destroying Richard's reputation and freedom. Victoria's presence in the hospital room felt like a violation of the most sacred kind. "How did you know I was here?" Emily asked, her voice hoarse from hours of medical procedures. "Richard called the office to cancel his meetings. David was so worried about you both." Victoria's tone was syrupy with false sympathy. "We all are." Emily felt a surge of rage that momentarily overcame even her fear for the baby. "Don't, just don't pretend to care about us when you're the reason this is happening." Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of cold satisfaction. "Stress-induced preterm labor is so dangerous. I hope for everyone's sake that you and the baby pull through this." "Get out," Emily said, her voice stronger despite the exhaustion. "Get out of here before I call security." "I understand you're upset and looking for someone to blame," Victoria continued, moving closer to the bed with predatory grace. "But perhaps this is nature's way of telling you that some situations are too toxic for new life to thrive." The implications of Victoria's words hit Emily like a physical blow. This woman wasn't just threatening Emily anymore. She was suggesting that the baby's life was expendable, that this pregnancy was somehow an obstacle to be eliminated. Emily's heart monitor began beeping more rapidly as her pulse spiked with fury and protective instinct. "If you think you can intimidate me while I'm fighting for my child's life, you're even more delusional than I thought. I'm just suggesting that sometimes letting go is the kindest option for everyone involved," Victoria said, her voice taking on the tone of someone offering reasonable advice. "Richard is facing very serious criminal charges. Even if you both survive this medical crisis, your family's going to be destroyed anyway. Why bring a child into that kind of chaos?" Emily reached for the call button, but Victoria gently intercepted her hand with a grip that was firm enough to restrain without appearing aggressive to any outside observer. "Think about it logically. Emily, Richard will probably go to prison for embezzlement. You'll lose the house, the lifestyle, everything you've built together. You'll be a single mother with no financial support, trying to raise a child whose father is a convicted criminal. Is that really the life you want for this baby?" "Let go of me," Emily said through gritted teeth. "I'm trying to help you see reality," Victoria continued, her grip tightening slightly. "Some pregnancies aren't meant to continue. Some families aren't meant to survive intact. Fighting against the inevitable will only cause more suffering for everyone." Emily looked directly into Victoria's eyes and saw something that chilled her to the bone: the complete absence of human empathy. This woman was capable of anything, including harming a pregnant woman and her unborn child to protect her criminal enterprise. "Nurse," Emily called out as loudly as her weakened voice allowed. "I need help." Victoria immediately released Emily's hand and stepped back, her expression transforming back into one of concerned sympathy, just as a nurse rushed into the room. "What's wrong? Mrs. Thompson, this woman needs to leave immediately. She's not family, and she's causing me distress that could harm my baby." The nurse looked between Emily and Victoria, noting Emily's elevated heart rate on the monitors. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The patient needs rest, and stress can be very dangerous in her condition." Victoria smiled graciously. "Of course, I completely understand. Emily, I hope you feel better soon, and I hope you make the right decisions for everyone involved." After Victoria left, Emily lay in the hospital bed, shaking with rage and fear. The woman had essentially threatened her child's life while maintaining plausible deniability, suggesting that the pregnancy should be terminated while framing it as compassionate advice. Emily's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Accidents happen in hospitals all the time. Medication errors, equipment failures, staff mistakes. It would be such a tragedy if something preventable happened to you or your baby." Emily screenshot the message immediately, then called Sarah, who arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes looking like she was ready for war. "That psychopath threatened your baby." Sarah's voice was tight with controlled fury as she read the text message. She made it sound like advice, but the implication was clear. "Sarah, I think she's planning to do something to hurt me or the baby while I'm helpless in here." Sarah immediately went into protective mode, contacting hospital security and arranging for a private duty nurse to monitor Emily's room around the clock. She also called Linda, who arrived with a laptop and a determination to finalize their evidence gathering before Victoria could strike again. "We need to end this now," Linda said, setting up her computer at Emily's bedside. "I've been working with a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. If we can provide them with solid evidence of Victoria's pattern of targeting wealthy men, they can move on this immediately." Working together, the three women compiled everything they had discovered: Sarah's research into Victoria's previous victims, Emily's photographs of financial documents, recordings of threatening conversations, and most importantly, evidence of the elaborate embezzlement scheme that was designed to frame Richard. But as they worked, Emily's condition worsened. The stress of Victoria's visit and the ongoing crisis had triggered another wave of preterm labor symptoms. Dr. Martinez returned with the kind of serious expression that indicated a potential catastrophe. "Emily, I'm afraid we need to discuss some difficult options," the doctor said gently. "The medications aren't stopping the labor progression as effectively as we hoped. If this continues, we may need to consider emergency interventions to save your life, even if it means we can't save the baby." Emily felt her world collapsing. In addition to losing her marriage, watching her husband face criminal charges, and being stalked by a dangerous criminal, she was now facing the possibility of losing the child she had waited 25 years to conceive. "How long do we have?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We'll continue monitoring you hour by hour. If your condition stabilizes, we can potentially buy more time for the baby's development. But if the labor progresses much further, we'll have to make some very difficult decisions very quickly." As Dr. Martinez left to review treatment options, Emily's phone rang with a call from Richard. When she answered, she could hear the strain and desperation in his voice. "Emily, I need you to know how sorry I am. The police have evidence that makes it look like I've been stealing from my own company for months. Documents with my signature, authorization codes that only I should know, financial transfers that I have no memory of making." "Victoria and David have been planning this for a long time," Emily said weakly. "They're professionals. Richard, they've done this before." "I know, I've hired the best criminal defense attorney in Chicago, but he says the evidence against me is overwhelming. I could be facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of catastrophe pressing down on all sides. Her baby was fighting for life. Her husband was facing prison, and the woman responsible for destroying their family was still free to cause more damage. "Richard, there's something else. Victoria came here today. She threatened the baby." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that Emily thought the call had dropped. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was dangerous in a way she had never heard before. "She threatened our child while you're fighting for both your lives. She suggested that the pregnancy should be terminated, that bringing a child into our toxic situation would be cruel. And then I got an anonymous text about accidents happening in hospitals. I'm coming back there right now." "No," Emily said firmly. "You need to stay and fight the charges. Sarah and Linda are here protecting me, and we're gathering evidence to expose Victoria and David. But Richard, I need you to promise me something. Anything, whatever happens to me or the baby, whatever Victoria does next, don't let her win. Don't let her destroy everything we've built together and walk away with millions of dollars to use on her next victims. Nothing is going to happen to you or our child," Richard said fiercely. "I won't let it." But as Emily hung up the phone, she realized that Richard's determination might not be enough to protect them from Victoria's escalating desperation. A woman who was willing to threaten a pregnancy and suggest termination would stop at nothing to protect her criminal enterprise. Emily looked at the monitors surrounding her bed, each one connected to systems that could be tampered with by someone with the right knowledge and access. She thought about Victoria's confident suggestion that accidents happen in hospitals all the time, and realized that the most dangerous phase of this heartbreaking family drama was just beginning. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to discover just how far her enemies would go to silence her permanently. But Emily was no longer the naive housewife who had stumbled onto a simple affair. She was a woman fighting for her child's life and her family's future, and she was prepared to use every weapon at her disposal to make sure Victoria Caldwell never hurt another family again. The final battle was coming, and Emily intended to win, no matter what it cost her. Emily's third night in the hospital was when everything went catastrophically wrong. She had stabilized enough that Dr. Martinez was cautiously optimistic about both her and the baby's chances. But at 2 in the morning, something triggered a cascade of medical emergencies that nearly cost them both their lives. It started with the IV line. Emily woke to find the drip rate had been adjusted to nearly maximum flow, flooding her system with medication that was supposed to be administered slowly over hours. The overdose caused her blood pressure to plummet and her heart rate to spike dangerously high, putting enormous stress on both her and the baby. The private duty nurse Sarah had hired discovered the problem during her hourly check and immediately called for emergency assistance. As medical staff flooded into the room, working frantically to stabilize Emily's condition, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure disappearing down the hallway. Victoria had been there, in the hospital, with access to Emily's room and medical equipment. "Someone tampered with your IV," the nurse whispered to Emily while doctors worked around them. "The flow rate was manually adjusted to a dangerous level. If I hadn't found it when I did." Emily's heart monitor beeped erratically as the implications sank in. Victoria had tried to kill her and the baby, making it look like a medical accident or equipment failure. Only the vigilance of Emily's protective team had prevented a successful murder. Dr. Martinez's face was grim as she explained the situation to Emily once her condition had stabilized. "The medication overdose could have been fatal for both you and the baby. It's going to take time to determine if there were any lasting effects on the pregnancy." "Was it definitely deliberate?" Emily asked, though she already knew the answer. The IV pump's digital record shows manual adjustments made during the night shift change, when the floor would have been least monitored. Hospital security is reviewing camera footage, but whoever did this knew exactly when and how to avoid detection. Emily's phone buzzed with another anonymous text. "Lucky escape. Next time you might not be so fortunate. Some women never learn." This time, Emily immediately forwarded the message to Detective Sarah Walsh, who had become involved in the case after Richard's arrest the previous day. The detective arrived at the hospital within an hour, her expression suggesting that Emily's situation was more serious than even Emily had realized. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to inform you that your husband was arrested this morning on charges of embezzling over $3 million from Thompson Technologies. The evidence against him is extensive and appears to be irrefutable." Emily's heart sank. Despite knowing it was coming, hearing about Richard's arrest felt like another devastating blow in a series of catastrophes that seemed designed to destroy everything she held dear. "What kind of evidence?" Emily asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Digital financial records showing transfers to offshore accounts, invoices for non-existent services, authorization codes that match his personal security credentials. The prosecutor believes this has been going on for at least 8 months. Detective, my husband is being framed by his business partner David Kellerman and a woman named Victoria Caldwell, who's been using the alias Victoria Hale. I have evidence that they've done this to other wealthy men in other cities." Detective Walsh looked intrigued but skeptical. "What kind of evidence?" Emily, Sarah, and Linda spent the next 2 hours laying out everything they had discovered: Victoria's false identity, the pattern of previous victims, the embezzlement scheme designed to frame Richard, and most importantly, the escalating threats and attempts to harm Emily and her unborn child. "This is compelling circumstantial evidence," Detective Walsh admitted, "but it's going to be difficult to prove in court. Victoria Hale has an impeccable professional reputation, and David Kellerman has been Richard's business partner for 15 years. Without irrefutable proof of their conspiracy, it will look like a desperate attempt to shift blame." "What about the attempt to murder me last night?" Emily asked. "Surely that proves something." "The hospital's investigation is ongoing, but so far they haven't found any footage of anyone tampering with your IV equipment. Whoever did it was very sophisticated about avoiding detection." Emily felt a crushing sense of despair as she realized how thoroughly Victoria had planned every aspect of this destruction. Even her attempt to murder Emily had been carried out with enough professional skill to avoid leaving traceable evidence. But the worst news came that afternoon, when Richard's attorney called with an update that transformed their dire situation into complete catastrophe. "Emily, I need to prepare you for some very bad news," the lawyer said gently. "The prosecution has offered Richard a plea deal, plead guilty to the embezzlement charges, and accept a 12-year sentence, or go to trial and potentially face 25 years if convicted." "But he's innocent," Emily protested weakly. "The evidence against him is overwhelming. Even I have to admit that proving his innocence would be extremely difficult. The prosecution has financial records, digital authorization trails, and witness testimony from David Kellerman that paint a very convincing picture of Richard as the mastermind of this scheme." Emily realized that David's role as a witness against Richard was brilliant from Victoria's perspective. It removed suspicion from David while providing seemingly credible testimony about Richard's supposed criminal behavior. The partnership that had defined Richard's professional life for 15 years was being weaponized against him. "How long does he have to decide about the plea deal?" 72 hours, Emily. "I hate to add to your stress during this medical crisis, but there's another complication. If Richard is convicted of felony embezzlement, he'll lose control of Thomson Technologies and all associated assets. The company will likely be liquidated to pay restitution to investors and creditors." The financial implications hit Emily like a physical blow. Not only would Richard go to prison, but they would lose everything: the house, the lifestyle, the financial security that should have supported their child's future. Emily would emerge from this crisis as a single mother with no resources, facing the prospect of raising a child whose father was a convicted felon. That evening, as Emily lay in the hospital bed contemplating the complete destruction of her life, she received a visit that would push her to the absolute breaking point. Victoria appeared in the doorway again, this time accompanied by David Kellerman, both wearing expressions of carefully calculated sympathy. "Emily, we heard about your medical scare," David said, his voice heavy with false concern. "We wanted to check on you and express how sorry we are about everything that's happened with Richard." Emily stared at the two people who had systematically destroyed her family, marveling at their audacity in coming to her hospital room to gloat over their success. "We know this must be an incredibly difficult time for you," Victoria added, her tone suggesting the kind of compassionate understanding that made Emily's skin crawl. "Learning about Richard's financial crimes while dealing with pregnancy complications must be overwhelming." "What do you want?" Emily asked, her voice flat with exhaustion and despair. David and Victoria exchanged a meaningful look before David spoke again. "We want to help you through this transition. Victoria has suggested that Thomson Technologies could provide some financial support for your medical expenses and immediate needs." Despite Richard's actions, Emily understood immediately what was being offered: hush money disguised as compassionate assistance. They were offering to take care of her financially in exchange for her silence about their crimes. "Of course, any assistance would be contingent on your understanding that Richard's situation is very delicate," Victoria added delicately. "Further accusations or investigations could make things much worse for him. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone we love is to help them accept responsibility for their actions and move forward." Emily looked at these two people who had destroyed everything she held dear, who had tried to murder her and her unborn child, who were now offering to buy her silence while her husband faced decades in prison for their crimes. The sheer audacity of their proposal, delivered while she lay helpless in a hospital bed, finally broke something fundamental inside her. "Get out," Emily said, her voice low and dangerous. "Emily, please don't make this harder than it has to be," Victoria said with false gentleness. "You're facing an impossible situation. Let us help you find a way through this that protects your child's future." "Get out," Emily screamed, her voice echoing through the hospital corridor. "Get out before I have security throw you out." David and Victoria left quickly, But not before Victoria delivered one final threat disguised as concern. I hope you make the right choices for your baby's sake. Emily, some decisions can't be undone. After they left, Emily broke down completely. The combination of physical exhaustion, emotional devastation, and the crushing weight of seemingly insurmountable problems finally overwhelmed her. She sobbed until she had no tears left, mourning not just for her marriage or her husband's freedom, but for the complete destruction of the life she had spent 25 years building. Sarah found her in this state when she arrived for her evening visit. Emily was curled up in the hospital bed, staring blankly at the wall, looking like a woman who had given up all hope. Em, what happened? The nurses said you had visitors who upset you. Emily told Sarah about Victoria and David's visit, their offer of financial support in exchange for silence, and their continued threats disguised as concern for her well-being. They've won, Emily said hollowly. Richard will go to prison, we'll lose everything, and they'll walk away with millions of dollars to use on their next victims. I couldn't protect my family. I couldn't even protect myself or my baby. Sarah sat on the edge of the hospital bed, taking Emily's hands in hers. Listen to me very carefully. Emily Thompson, you are not beaten. You are not broken. And you are definitely not giving up. What's the point? Emily asked. Even if I could prove what they've done, it's too late to save Richard or our life together. The point is that there are other families out there who will face the same destruction if Victoria and David aren't stopped. The point is that your child deserves to know that their mother fought for justice, even when it seemed impossible. The point is that women like us don't let monsters win just because the odds are against us. Emily looked at her best friend, seeing the fierce determination that had helped Sarah rebuild her own life after professional and personal setbacks. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we stop playing defense and start playing offense. I'm suggesting that instead of trying to prove Richard's innocence, we focus on proving Victoria and David's guilt. And I'm suggesting that we use the one advantage they don't know we have. What advantage? Sarah smiled grimly. Richard's security cameras have been recording everything, including conversations between Victoria and David that they thought were private. If we can access those recordings, we might find evidence of them discussing their crimes, their previous victims, or their plans for the future. Emily felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. You think they've been careless enough to discuss their conspiracy on camera? I think criminals always get overconfident when they think they're winning, and Victoria and David definitely think they've won. That night, as Emily lay in the hospital bed, she made a decision that would change everything. She was done being the victim in this heartbreaking family drama. She was done letting other people control her fate and her family's future. Tomorrow, she would begin the fight of her life, not just for Richard's freedom or their financial security, but for justice for all the families Victoria and David had destroyed. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become the most dangerous enemy these criminals had ever faced. But Emily also knew that once she started this final battle, there would be no turning back. Victoria had already tried to kill her once, and desperation would make her even more dangerous. Emily was risking everything on one last chance to expose the truth and save her family. As she drifted off to sleep, Emily's hand rested protectively on her belly, where her child continued to fight for survival. "Hold on, little one," she whispered. "Mommy's going to make sure you're born into a world where the bad guys don't win." The final confrontation was coming, and Emily intended to make sure that Victoria Caldwell would regret the day she decided to target the Thompson family. Emily's discharge from the hospital 5 days later marked the beginning of what would become the most intense investigation of her life. Dr. Martinez had managed to stop the preterm labor, but Emily remained on a strict bed rest with twice-weekly monitoring to ensure the baby's continued health. The medical crisis had stabilized, but the legal and financial catastrophes were just beginning to unfold. Richard's arraignment had been a media spectacle that left Emily grateful she was confined to bed rest. Local news stations had covered the story extensively, tech billionaire charged with embezzling millions from own company. The narrative portrayed Richard as a greedy executive who had stolen from investors and employees to fund a lavish lifestyle, with Victoria appearing in several interviews as the shocked and disappointed employee who had discovered the irregularities. "She's playing her role perfectly," Linda observed as they watched Victoria's tearful interview on the evening news. "Look at her body language, her tone, the way she expresses disappointment rather than anger. She's positioning herself as another victim of Richard's deception." Emily studied Victoria's performance with grudging admiration for the woman's acting skills. Victoria appeared genuinely heartbroken as she described discovering financial irregularities that she had felt obligated to report to authorities. She spoke about Richard with the kind of professional respect that suggested a mentor-student relationship rather than an intimate affair. "She's erasing the affair completely," Emily realized. "If there's no evidence of a romantic relationship, there's no motive for her to frame him. She becomes a whistleblower instead of a conspirator." Sarah nodded grimly. "Which is why we need to find evidence of their conspiracy that goes beyond the financial crimes. Something that proves Victoria and David planned this together. Something that shows their pattern of targeting other victims." The three women had transformed Emily's bedroom into a command center for their investigation. Linda had installed sophisticated computer equipment that allowed them to access financial databases and public records from multiple states. Sarah had reached out to law enforcement contacts across the country, gathering information about similar cases involving wealthy men and younger women. Emily coordinated everything from her bed, using the enforced rest period to become an expert in financial forensics and criminal investigation techniques. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Richard's security system. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding those cameras," Emily told Linda during one of their strategy sessions. "Richard installed them throughout the house about 2 years ago, claiming it was for security after a break-in in our neighborhood. But what if he had other motives?" Linda looked intrigued. "Such as, what if Richard suspected something was wrong with his business relationships even before Victoria arrived? What if he installed the cameras to monitor David's activities during their meetings at the house?" Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. "You think Richard might have been suspicious of David's behavior for longer than we realized?" Emily nodded. "Think about it. David has been his business partner for 15 years, with access to all the company's financial systems. If Richard noticed irregularities or had concerns about David's loyalty, secret surveillance would be a logical precaution." Linda immediately began examining the technical specifications of Richard's security system. What she discovered was far more sophisticated than a standard residential setup. The cameras were military-grade, with audio recording capabilities and cloud storage that preserved footage for up to 2 years. Every conversation that had taken place in the main areas of the house was potentially documented. "This is a gold mine," Linda breathed as she accessed the system's database. "Emily, your husband has been recording everything for 2 years. Every meeting with David, every conversation with Victoria, every interaction between all the conspirators. But accessing the relevant footage would require careful analysis of hundreds of hours of recordings." Emily, still confined to bed rest, became the primary reviewer, using voice recognition software and timestamp analysis to identify conversations involving Victoria, David, or Thompson Technologies business. What Emily discovered in those recordings would ultimately save her family and destroy her enemies. The first crucial conversation had been recorded 6 months before Victoria's official hiring at Thompson Technologies. David was on the phone in Richard's study, unaware that the security system was capturing every word. "The target is perfect," David was saying to someone Emily assumed was Victoria. "He's wealthy, isolated from his business, day-to-day operations since his wife's been focused on getting pregnant, and emotionally vulnerable because of their fertility struggles. If we play this right, we can take him for everything." Emily's hands shook as she listened to David casually discussing the destruction of her family as if they were planning a routine business transaction. The conversation continued with David explaining Richard's psychological profile, his weaknesses, and the best strategies for manipulation. "He's got a savior complex when it comes to young women with professional ambitions. If Victoria presents herself as talented but struggling, he'll want to mentor her. From mentorship to infatuation is a very short step for men like Richard. But the most damning evidence came from recordings made after Victoria's arrival at Thompson Technologies. Emily found dozens of conversations between Victoria and David, recorded during their meetings at the house when they thought Richard was traveling or working late. Phase 1 is complete. Victoria's voice was clear and confident on the recording from 3 months earlier. Richard is completely infatuated and trusting me with more responsibility every week. I now have access to most of the financial systems and authorization codes. What about the wife? David's voice carried concern. She's been more observant lately, asking questions about the business that suggests she might be suspicious. Emily Thompson is exactly what she appears to be, a naive housewife with no real understanding of business or technology. If she becomes a problem, there are ways to handle that. Emily paused the recording, her heart pounding with the realization that she was listening to evidence that would not only exonerate Richard, but also expose the full scope of Victoria and David's criminal conspiracy. The recordings revealed the complete timeline of their scheme, David's initial recruitment of Victoria after meeting her during a previous scam in Miami, their research into Richard's personal and financial vulnerabilities, Victoria's careful infiltration of Thompson Technologies, and their systematic theft of company assets over several months. But most importantly, the recordings captured Victoria and David discussing their previous victims in detail. The Seattle architect was almost too easy. Victoria's voice carried a note of professional pride. His wife suspected something near the end, but the car accident solved that problem very neatly. And the Denver real estate developer, heart attack brought on by the stress of discovering his financial ruin, very convenient timing, just before he could expose our involvement. Emily felt sick as she realized she was listening to confessions of multiple murders disguised as accidents. Victoria and David weren't just thieves, they were serial killers who eliminated obstacles to their criminal enterprise. The final piece of evidence was the most recent recording, made just 2 days after Victoria's visit to Emily in the hospital. Victoria and David were discussing their concerns about Emily's investigation and planning their response. "She's more tenacious than we anticipated," David was saying. "Even hospitalized and facing pregnancy complications, she's still gathering evidence and asking dangerous questions." "The overdose should have solved that problem," Victoria replied coldly. "But since she survived, we need to accelerate our timeline. How quickly can we complete the asset transfers?" "The final phase can be completed within 48 hours. But what about Emily? She has enough information to potentially expose us if she keeps investigating." Victoria's response chilled Emily to the bone. Emily Thompson is about to discover that some investigations come with fatal consequences. Stress-induced pregnancy complications can become very serious very quickly, especially with the right medical intervention. Emily immediately copied the entire conversation and sent it to Detective Walsh, Sarah, and Linda simultaneously. This was irrefutable evidence of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and confessions to previous homicides. Detective Walsh's response was immediate. "This is exactly what we needed. I'm getting warrants for both suspects immediately. Emily, you and your baby need protective custody until we can arrest them." But Emily's sense of triumph was short-lived. As she was preparing to leave the house with Sarah and Linda to meet Detective Walsh at a secure location, she received a text from Richard's phone. "Emily, I need to see you immediately. I've discovered evidence that will clear me completely. Meet me at the warehouse. Come alone or they'll destroy everything." Emily stared at the message, her heart sinking as she realized what was happening. Victoria and David had somehow discovered her investigation, possibly through monitoring Richard's communications from jail. They were using Richard's phone to lure her into a trap, probably planning to kill her and make it appear that stress over Richard's situation had caused a fatal medical emergency. "It's obviously a trap," Sarah said when Emily showed her the text. "We call Detective Walsh immediately and wait for backup." But Emily was thinking about the recordings she had discovered, about Victoria's calm discussion of murdering previous victims who had gotten too close to the truth. Victoria and David were preparing to disappear, probably within hours, taking millions of stolen dollars to start their next scam in another city. If we wait for official procedures, they'll be gone, Emily said. This might be our only chance to stop them before they kill again. Linda shook her head firmly. Emily, you're 7 months pregnant and on bed rest. You can't seriously be considering confronting two murderers. Emily looked at her friends, these women who had supported her through the worst crisis of her life, and made a decision that surprised them all. I'm not going to confront them, she said calmly. I'm going to outsmart them. Emily's plan was simple but dangerous. She would go to the meeting location as requested, but she would be wearing a wire provided by Detective Walsh and carrying a tracking device that would allow law enforcement to monitor her location and arrest Victoria and David in the act of attempting to harm her. It's the only way to catch them with irrefutable evidence of attempted murder. Emily explained to Detective Walsh, the recordings prove their past crimes, but we need evidence of them actively trying to harm me to ensure they can't claim the recordings were taken out of context. Detective Walsh was reluctant to approve such a dangerous operation, especially involving a pregnant woman. But Emily's argument was compelling. Victoria and David were clearly preparing to flee, and without catching them in the act of committing a new crime, they might successfully argue that the recordings were ambiguous or fabricated. If we do this, you follow my instructions exactly, Detective Walsh said firmly. At the first sign of real danger, you activate the emergency signal and we move in immediately. Emily agreed, though privately she wondered if she would have the opportunity to signal for help if Victoria and David's plan involved immediate violence. That evening, as Emily drove toward the warehouse location in the industrial district where Thompson Technologies stored excess inventory, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a naive housewife whose biggest concern was decorating a nursery. Now she was a woman preparing to face down serial killers to protect her family and prevent future victims. The transformation had been painful but empowering. Emily no longer saw herself as someone who needed protection or someone whose life was defined by other people's choices. She was a woman capable of investigating complex crimes, gathering evidence, and making strategic decisions that could save lives. But as she pulled into the empty warehouse parking lot and saw Victoria and David waiting beside an unmarked van, Emily realized that all her newfound strength and confidence would be tested in the next few minutes. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to face her final confrontation with the people who had tried to destroy everything she loved. The question was whether Emily's transformation from victim to survivor would be enough to ensure that she and her baby would live to see justice served. The warehouse parking lot was eerily quiet as Emily approached Victoria and David, her heart pounding despite her outward calm. The wire Detective Walsh had given her was hidden beneath her maternity sweater, and the tracking device was sewn into the lining of her purse. Every word spoken in the next few minutes would be recorded and transmitted to the police team positioned around the perimeter. Emily, thank goodness you came, David said, his voice carrying false relief as she stepped out of her car. We have evidence that completely exonerates Richard, but we need to move quickly before it's destroyed. Emily forced herself to smile as if she believed their lie. What kind of evidence? Victoria stepped forward, her expression perfectly crafted to suggest urgency and concern. Financial records that prove someone else has been using Richard's authorization codes to steal from the company. We think we know who the real embezzler is, but we need your help to prove it. Why do you need my help? Emily asked, playing along while noting how both Victoria and David had positioned themselves to block her retreat to the car. Because the evidence is digital, and it requires Richard's personal password to access, David explained. He won't give it to us, but he might have shared it with you for emergencies. Emily realized they were fishing for information that would allow them to complete their theft of Thompson Technologies' remaining assets. They hadn't discovered her investigation at all. They were simply running out of time to steal everything before Richard's case went to trial. Richard never shared his business passwords with me, Emily said truthfully. He kept work and home completely separate. Victoria and David exchanged a look that confirmed Emily's suspicions. They had brought her here under false pretenses. probably planning to force her to contact Richard and convince him to provide the access codes they needed. "That's unfortunate," Victoria said, her tone shifting slightly. "Because time is running out for all of us. Richard's trial is scheduled to begin next week, and once he's convicted, all company assets will be frozen pending restitution proceedings." Emily understood the subtext. Victoria and David needed to complete their theft immediately, before the legal system made it impossible to access any remaining funds. Emily's arrival had given them an opportunity to apply pressure, possibly using threats against her and the baby to force Richard's cooperation. "Maybe we should call Richard together," Emily suggested, pulling out her phone. "I'm sure if we explain the situation, he'll be willing to help clear his name." But as Emily lifted the phone, David moved quickly to snatch it from her hands. "I'm afraid it's not that simple. Emily, you see, we can't risk any outside communications until this matter is resolved." Emily's blood ran cold as she realized the situation had shifted from deception to kidnapping. Victoria and David weren't just trying to scam her. They were preparing to hold her hostage to force Richard's compliance. "What's really going on here?" Emily asked, allowing fear to creep into her voice while calculating the distance to her car and wondering how quickly the police team could respond to her emergency signal. Victoria's mask finally dropped completely, revealing the cold predator that Emily had glimpsed during their previous confrontations. "What's going on, Emily, is that you've been far more troublesome than we anticipated. Most wives in your situation accept the inevitable and focus on salvaging what they can from the wreckage of their marriages. But you've been playing detective," David added, his voice carrying genuine anger. "Asking questions, gathering information, making yourself a liability that we can no longer ignore." Emily realized they did know about her investigation, and they had brought her here to eliminate the threat she represented. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become another accident that would permanently silence the only person who understood the full scope of their crimes. "I don't know what you think I've discovered," Emily said, trying to buy time while slowly moving her hand toward the emergency signal device in her purse. "I'm just a pregnant housewife trying to understand why my life is falling apart." Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "We know you've been accessing Richard's computer, photographing financial documents, and meeting with that meddling neighbor of yours who thinks she's some kind of private investigator. We also know you've been talking to the police," David continued, "which means you've probably shared your amateur theories about our supposed conspiracy. Very dangerous behavior for someone in your condition." Emily felt a chill of recognition as she remembered Victoria's previous threats about stress-induced pregnancy complications. These people had already tried to kill her once in the hospital. They were clearly prepared to try again. "What do you want from me?" Emily asked, her hand finally reaching the emergency signal device. "We want you to call Richard and convince him to provide the access codes we need to complete our financial transactions," Victoria said matter-of-factly. "In exchange, we'll ensure that you and your baby survive this encounter." Emily activated the emergency signal with a subtle press of the button hidden in her purse, then looked directly into Victoria's eyes. "And if I refuse," Victoria pulled a syringe from her jacket pocket, the needle glinting in the warehouse lighting, "then you'll experience a stress-induced medical emergency that proves too severe for emergency responders to treat successfully. Your baby might survive if the paramedics arrive quickly enough, but that would depend on how quickly someone discovers your body." Emily's protective instincts flared as she realized Victoria was threatening to inject her with something that would cause a medical crisis similar to what had happened in the hospital. "What's in the syringe? A cocktail of medications that will trigger severe preterm labor and cardiovascular distress," Victoria explained with clinical detachment. "The autopsy will show that you died from pregnancy complications exacerbated by stress over your husband's legal troubles. Very tragic, but completely natural." Emily forced herself to remain calm despite the terror coursing through her veins. She needed to keep Victoria and David talking until the police team could move in for arrests. "You've done this before," Emily said, thinking about the recordings she had discovered. "The wives who died in Seattle and Denver weren't accidents. David smiled coldly. Very good, Emily. You really have been doing your homework. Yes, we've had to eliminate obstacles before. It's an unfortunate necessity in our line of work. Your line of work being serial fraud and murder. Our line of work being wealth redistribution, Victoria corrected. Men like Richard accumulate far more money than they could ever need while people like us struggle to achieve the success we deserve. We simply correct that imbalance. Emily stared at these people who had systematically destroyed her family while justifying their crimes with twisted logic about social justice. And the wives who get in your way are just collateral damage. The wives are usually grateful to be freed from marriages that were already failing. David said, we simply accelerate the inevitable while ensuring they don't suffer through lengthy divorce proceedings. How considerate of you, Emily said sarcastically, then immediately regretted antagonizing them when Victoria stepped closer with the syringe. Make the call. Emily, Victoria commanded. One phone call to Richard, and this all ends peacefully for everyone? Emily realized she was out of time. The police team hadn't appeared yet, which meant either her emergency signal hadn't transmitted properly or they were still positioning themselves for the arrests. Either way, she was going to have to stall for more time without provoking Victoria into immediate violence. I'll make the call, Emily said, reaching slowly for the phone David had taken from her. But I need to understand what I'm asking Richard to do. What specific access codes do you need? Victoria and David exchanged another look, clearly debating how much information to share. Finally, David spoke. There are 2 offshore accounts that contain the bulk of the funds we've transferred. The final authorization requires Richard's biometric signature, which he can provide remotely if he logs into the system and verifies his identity. Emily understood now why they needed Richard's cooperation instead of simply stealing the codes. The security system required his active participation, which meant they couldn't complete the theft without his knowledge and consent. If I convince Richard to provide the authorization, will you really let us go? Emily asked, knowing the answer but hoping to get them to reveal their true intentions on the recording. Victoria's smile was answer enough. Emily, you've seen too much and learned too much to simply walk away from this. Even if you promise to stay silent, we couldn't risk you changing your mind later. So you're going to kill me regardless of what I do. We're going to ensure that you can never testify against us, David corrected. Whether that requires your death depends on how cooperative you are in the next few minutes. Emily realized that Victoria and David had no intention of letting her live. Regardless of what concessions she made, they had brought her here to die, with the phone call to Richard being just a final attempt to steal whatever money remained accessible to them. But as Emily prepared to face what might be her final moments, she heard the sound she had been praying for, car doors slamming in rapid succession, followed by Detective Walsh's voice shouting through a megaphone. This is the Chicago Police Department, Victoria Caldwell and David Kellerman. You are under arrest. Release Mrs. Thompson immediately and surrender with your hands visible. Victoria spun toward the sound of the police announcement, her face contorting with rage as she realized their plan had been discovered. In that moment of distraction, Emily made a desperate lunge for safety, throwing herself behind a nearby shipping container just as Victoria lunged forward with the syringe. The next few minutes were chaos as police officers swarmed the warehouse, shouting commands and positioning themselves around the building. Emily heard gunshots and screaming, but she stayed hidden behind the shipping container, protecting her belly with both hands and praying that her baby would survive whatever violence was unfolding around them. When Detective Walsh finally found her, Emily was shaking but unharmed. Are you okay? Did they hurt you or inject you with anything? Emily shook her head, tears of relief streaming down her face. The baby's okay. I can feel movement. We're okay. Victoria and David are in custody, Detective Walsh said, helping Emily to her feet. They're both facing charges of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and based on the recordings you provided, we'll be adding charges related to the deaths in Seattle and Denver. Emily looked toward the police cars where Victoria and David were being loaded in handcuffs, their carefully constructed scheme finally collapsing around them. Victoria caught Emily's eye through the window of the police car, her expression promising revenge even in defeat. But Emily no longer felt intimidated by Victoria's threats. The pregnant wife betrayed had survived the final confrontation and emerged victorious. The evidence they had gathered would not only exonerate Richard, but would ensure that Victoria and David faced justice for all their crimes. As paramedics checked Emily and the baby to ensure they had suffered no harmful effects from the stress of the confrontation, Emily felt a profound sense of empowerment. She had faced down serial killers, gathered evidence that would save her husband's freedom, and protected her unborn child from people who would have murdered them both without hesitation. The heartbreaking family drama that had begun with a mistaken text message was finally approaching its resolution. But Emily knew that the real work of rebuilding their lives was just beginning. Richard would be released from jail within days once the evidence against Victoria and David was presented to the court. Thompson Technologies could be rebuilt, though it would take time to recover the stolen funds and restore the company's reputation. Emily and Richard would need marriage counseling to address the betrayal and deception that had nearly destroyed their relationship. But for the first time in months, Emily felt genuinely hopeful about their future. The naive housewife who had discovered her husband's affair was gone, replaced by a woman who had proven herself capable of fighting for her family's survival against impossible odds. As she was loaded into an ambulance for precautionary medical evaluation, Emily placed her hand on her belly and whispered to her unborn child, "It's over, little one. The bad people are gone, and Daddy will be coming home soon. We're going to be okay." The midlife betrayal story that had threatened to destroy the Thompson family was ending, not with defeat and despair, but with justice, empowerment, and the promise of a stronger future built on truth instead of lies. 3 weeks after Victoria and David's arrest, Emily stood in the courthouse hallway watching Richard walk free from what should have been the beginning of a decades-long prison sentence. The judge had dismissed all charges after reviewing the evidence Emily had gathered, acknowledging that Richard had been the victim of an elaborate conspiracy rather than the perpetrator of financial crimes. The media coverage of the case had been extensive, transforming Richard from a vilified embezzler into a sympathetic victim of criminal manipulation. Victoria and David were facing multiple felony charges across several states, with prosecutors in Seattle and Denver reopening the cases involving their previous victims' deaths. But standing there watching her husband emerge from the legal nightmare that had nearly destroyed him, Emily felt a complex mixture of emotions that surprised her with its intensity. Relief, certainly, that Richard's innocence had been proven and their financial future secured. Pride in her own role in exposing the truth and protecting their family. But also a profound uncertainty about what came next for their marriage. The affair might have been orchestrated by criminals, but Richard had still betrayed their wedding vows. The pregnancy might have survived the multiple crises, but Emily had been fundamentally changed by the experience of fighting for their survival. The naive housewife who had trusted completely was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to question everything and depend primarily on herself. "How do you feel?" Dr. Chen asked during Emily's first therapy session after the crisis ended. "Complicated," Emily admitted. "I'm grateful that Richard is free and that we exposed Victoria and David before they could hurt other families. But I'm also angry about the affair, even knowing it was part of their manipulation. And I'm not sure I know how to be married to Richard anymore." "What do you mean?" Emily struggled to articulate the fundamental shift that had occurred in her identity. "For 25 years, I defined myself through my relationship with Richard. I was his wife, his support system, the person who made his success possible. But during this crisis, I discovered that I'm capable of being so much more than that. I investigated crimes, gathered evidence, made strategic decisions that saved our family. I don't want to go back to being just someone's wife." Dr. Chen nodded with understanding. Many women experience this kind of awakening during midlife crises, especially when they're forced to become independent and self-reliant. The question is whether Richard is willing to accept and support the person you've become, rather than expecting you to return to the person you were. That question became central to Emily and Richard's attempts at reconciliation. Richard had emerged from jail deeply grateful for Emily's role in proving his innocence, but he also seemed to expect that they would simply resume their previous life once the legal crisis was resolved. "I've learned my lesson about trusting the wrong people," Richard said during one of their early conversations after his release. "From now on, I'll be more careful about business relationships, and I'll include you in more decisions about the company." Emily appreciated his acknowledgement of past mistakes, but she sensed that Richard didn't fully understand how profoundly she had changed during their ordeal. He was offering to share more information with her, but he wasn't recognizing her as an equal partner in their marriage and business ventures. The tension came to a head during a dinner party they hosted to celebrate Richard's freedom and thank the friends who had supported them during the crisis. Emily found herself surrounded by people congratulating her on being such a devoted wife, praising her for standing by Richard during his troubles, and expressing admiration for her loyalty in the face of adversity. "You're such an inspiration," one of their guests gushed. "Not every woman would have fought so hard to prove her husband's innocence. Richard is so lucky to have someone who believes in him unconditionally." Emily smiled politely, but inside she felt frustrated by the narrative that reduced her investigation and evidence gathering to simple wifely devotion. She hadn't fought to prove Richard's innocence out of blind loyalty. She had fought to protect her child's future and to ensure that dangerous criminals didn't escape justice. After the guests left, Emily confronted Richard about the way their story was being framed. "People are acting like I'm some kind of devoted wife who stood by her man despite overwhelming evidence of his guilt. That's not what happened. Richard, I investigated the truth because I needed to understand what was really going on, not because I had faith in your innocence." Richard looked confused by her objection. "But the result is the same. You saved our marriage and my freedom. Why does the motivation matter?" "Because it matters to me," Emily said firmly. "I want credit for being smart and strategic and capable, not just loyal and devoted. I want people to understand that I solved a complex criminal conspiracy, not that I simply stood by my husband during difficult times." "You're right," Richard said, but Emily could see that he didn't fully grasp the importance of the distinction she was making. To him, her motivations were less important than her actions and their positive results. The disconnect became more apparent as they attempted to rebuild their physical and emotional intimacy. Richard approached their reconciliation with the assumption that proving his innocence had resolved all the issues between them, but Emily found herself struggling with lingering anger and mistrust that had nothing to do with Victoria's manipulation. "I keep thinking about the fact that you had an affair," Emily said during one of their marriage counseling sessions. "I know Victoria was manipulating you, but you still chose to betray our marriage vows. You still chose to lie to me about where you were and what you were doing." Richard's expression was pained but defensive. "Emily, you know the affair was part of Victoria's plan to control me. She targeted my vulnerabilities and manipulated me into a relationship I never would have chosen under normal circumstances." "But you did choose it," Emily insisted. "Maybe you were being manipulated, but you still made decisions every day to continue the affair. You still looked me in the eye and lied about working late. You still chose Victoria over me, at least temporarily." Their therapist, Dr. Michelle Rodriguez, helped them navigate these complex emotions during several difficult sessions. "Emily, it's important that you acknowledge the difference between Richard's choices and Victoria's manipulation. But Richard, it's equally important that you take responsibility for the choices you made, regardless of the circumstances that influenced them." Richard struggled with this concept initially, wanting to attribute all blame to Victoria's manipulation rather than examining his own role in the betrayal. But gradually, he began to understand that Emily needed him to acknowledge his agency in the affair, even while recognizing that he had been victimized by criminals. "I chose to have the affair," Richard finally admitted during a particularly emotional session. "I was vulnerable because of our fertility struggles and my midlife insecurities, and Victoria exploited those vulnerabilities expertly, but ultimately, I made the decision to betray our marriage, and I'm responsible for that choice regardless of how I was manipulated into making it." Emily felt a profound relief at hearing Richard take full responsibility for his actions. It was the foundation they needed too.